I died that night. I felt the bullets rip through my chest and I watched the world fade to black. Most people fear that moment. But what I need you to understand is that my death, it wasn't the end. It was where my real life finally began. Before that, my name was Aluyu, and I was a soldier for Boko Haram. The only air I breathed was filled with hate. The only bread I ate was violence. That night, the smell of burning huts was thick in my throat. The fire we'd set cast long, dancing shadows that made the world look like a living hell, and I was one of its keepers. My commander's voice echoed in my head louder than the screams. Eliminate them, leave no witnesses. The order was simple. In front of me, a family was huddled on the dirt floor of their home. A father, a mother, and 2 little kids. They were the enemy. A target. That's what I'd been taught. What had been beaten into me since I was a boy. I leveled my rifle. The cold metal felt like an extension of my own hand. My finger rested on the trigger. It was a familiar feeling. It should have been easy. It was what I always did. All the indoctrination, all the blood I'd seen, it all pushed me to just pull it and be done. But then, I looked into the father's eyes. He wasn't looking at me with hatred. There was no fear. It was a strange, unsettling peace. It cut through all the noise in my head. And the mother, she wasn't screaming anymore. She was just holding her children, her eyes shut tight, her lips moving in a silent prayer. My hands started to shake. For the first time, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a woman protecting her babies. And in the silence of her prayer, I heard something I'd forgotten even existed. Faith. My finger, which had taken so many lives without a second thought, suddenly felt impossibly heavy. That one moment of hesitation changed everything. But what happened next was even worse. Before I was the man who died, I was a ghost who walked. My days were all the same, painted in the colors of dust and dried blood. I'd wake up before the sun, the air already thick with heat. The first thing I touched wasn't my face or a cup of water. It was the cold, hard steel of my rifle. It was my most loyal companion, my only friend. It never asked questions. It only did what I told it to. We were told we were soldiers of God, that our violence was a holy act, a cleansing fire. Our commander Idris had a voice like grinding stones, and his words were our world. He'd tell us the enemy wasn't human. They were an infestation, a sickness that had to be burned out. As I believed him, I had to. It was the only story that made sense of the life I was forced to live since they took me from my own village. A memory I had buried so deep I could barely remember my mother's face. Idris was the closest thing I had to a father. I craved his approval. A simple nod from him after a successful raid felt like the sun on my face. The other boys, we called each other brother, but we weren't. We were just dogs in the same pack, held together by fear and a shared, manufactured hate. We never talked about our pasts. We never talked about the future. There was only the mission, the command, the kill. Anything else was a weakness Idris would beat out of you. But there was a secret I kept, a rot deep inside me that no one could see. In the quiet moments between the prayers and the cleaning of our weapons, I felt nothing. A complete, terrifying emptiness. I remember one raid, my friend Jabriel was shot right next to me. I saw the light leave his eyes. I should have felt rage. I should have felt sorrow. I felt nothing. It was like watching a leaf fall from a tree. I just stepped over his body and kept fighting. That night, lying on my mat, the hollowness inside me was so vast it felt like it would swallow me whole. Was I even a man anymore, or just a machine made of flesh and bone? This emptiness made me reckless. It made me a better soldier. When you don't fear death, you become very good at delivering it. But something was starting to crack. A few weeks before that final night, we overran a small farming outpost. It was empty. They had fled. In the dirt, I saw a child's doll made of old fabric and yarn. I stared at it for a long time. Its button eyes seemed to look right through me into that empty space inside my chest. One of the others laughed and kicked it into a fire. I said nothing, but the image of it burning had stayed with me. I couldn't understand why. So when Idris gathered us that evening, his eyes burning with a feverish light, and spoke of the village we were about to hit, his words felt different. He promised us glory, paradise. But all I could hear was a ringing in my ears. The emptiness inside me was a roaring silence, louder than his commands, louder than the battle cries of my brothers. I loaded my rifle, my hands moving on pure muscle memory. My body was there, marching toward that village, but my soul was already gone. I thought it was just another night of fire and death. I had no idea that the orders I was about to receive would lead me not to glory, but to the end of everything I thought I knew. What would you do if you realized the cause you were willing to die for was built on a lie? If my story is speaking to you, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened when I came back from the dead is a story you won't want to miss. The march was different that night. The air, usually just hot and dry, felt heavy. It clung to my skin like a wet shroud. The other boys were buzzing, their whispers sharp and excited like starving dogs about to be fed. They were high on Idris's promises of paradise. I just felt the weight of my rifle, the familiar chafe of the strap against my shoulder, and a low, persistent hum in the back of my skull. It was the sound of that roaring silence inside me, a warning I didn't know how to hear. Then we all saw it. A great horned owl perched on a dead baobab tree right in our path. It was a creature of darkness, but it stared at us with eyes that seemed to burn with their own light. It didn't move. It just watched us pass. One of the younger boys muttered it was a bad omen. Idris overheard him and struck him hard across the back of the head. "The only omen is the will of God," he roared. But I saw his eyes dart back to the owl. I saw his hand clutch the charm he wore around his neck. He was the one who taught us not to believe in such things. It was the first lie I ever caught him in. As we got closer, I started noticing other things, small things. Idris wasn't walking at the front, proud and commanding like usual. He was in the middle of the pack, his steps hurried, his head constantly on a swivel. He looked less like a wolf leading his pack and more like a nervous goat trying to hide within the herd. The other boys, lost in their own violent daydreams, didn't see it, but I did. I saw the sweat on his brow glistening in the moonlight. He wasn't marching toward a victory. He was running from something. But what could a man like Idris possibly be afraid of? The village was dead silent when we arrived. No dogs barking, no late-night conversations drifting from the huts. Just the whisper of the wind through the thatch roofs. The silence was a living thing, a predator waiting in the dark. It coiled in my stomach, cold and tight. This wasn't the quiet of a sleeping village, it was the quiet of a held breath. The quiet of absolute fear. My hand, the one that had held a rifle since I was a boy, was slick with a sweat that had nothing to do with the heat. The attack began with a single whistle, and the silence shattered into a million pieces of fire and screams. I moved on instinct, my body a weapon honed by years of practice. But my mind was detached, floating above the chaos. I saw the world in flashes. A child's sandal lying in the dust, a pot of soup knocked over, spilling onto the dirt. These weren't the dens of infidels. These were homes. The emptiness inside me was gone, replaced by a nausea so profound I thought I would be sick right there. Every shot fired by my brothers felt like a hammer blow against my own skull. Then Idris was on me, his face a mask of frantic rage. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. "That one," he hissed, his voice cracking. He pointed toward a small hut set slightly apart from the others. "The pastor. Go. Leave no one." His eyes were wild, darting around as if he expected an army to rise from the very ground. There was something more than just strategic importance here. This was personal for him. This was about fear. He shoved me so hard I stumbled. I walked toward that simple clay hut, and the entire world seemed to fade away. The gunfire, the screams, it all became a distant ringing. The only sound was the crunch of my boots in the dirt and the frantic, desperate pounding of my own heart. I stood before the flimsy wooden door, my rifle raised. I could hear whimpering from inside. I knew what I was supposed to do. I'd done it 100 times before. But standing there, I had the overwhelming feeling that if I kicked that door in, I wouldn't be the one walking out. Not the same man, anyway. But what happened next was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. I kicked the door. It wasn't a solid kick of a soldier. It was the hesitant shove of a man already broken. The wood splintered, and the door swung open with a pathetic creak. The world outside, the one of fire and screaming, just vanished. Inside this small hut, there was a different universe. A single oil lamp cast a gentle, flickering glow on the 4 people huddled in the corner. The pastor, his wife, and 2 small children, a boy and a girl who couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. The air was thick with the smell of lamp oil and something else, the smell of raw, undiluted terror. The mother had her arms wrapped around her children, trying to make herself a shield. The little boy was crying silently, tears making clean tracks down his dusty cheeks. But the pastor, he did something I never expected. He stood up, slowly. He wasn't a big man, but in that moment he seemed to fill the entire room. He looked me right in the eye, and there was no hate, there was no defiance. There was only a deep, heartbreaking sadness, as if he was pitying me. My rifle came up almost on its own, the barrel leveled at his chest. My training, the voice of Idris, the ghosts of 100 other raids, they all screamed in my head. "Finish it. This is weakness. A soldier does not feel." The pastor didn't flinch. He just held his hands out, palms open, in a gesture that wasn't surrender but an invitation. "God forgive you, my son," he said, his voice a low, steady whisper. "For you do not know what you are doing, my son." He called me his son. The words hit me harder than any bullet ever could. My finger was on the trigger. I felt the cold curve of the metal, the slight give before the final pull. My entire life, every command I had ever followed, led to this single, simple action. But my finger wouldn't move, it was frozen. I looked from his peaceful face to the terrified eyes of his wife, to the small children who had stopped crying and were just staring at the monster in their home. The monster that was me. The doll I saw burning in the fire flashed in my mind. This wasn't a target. This was a family. And in that tiny, suffocating hut, I finally saw the truth. Idris wasn't a soldier of God. He was just a man terrified of the light, and I was his tool of darkness. With a sob that tore its way up from that empty place inside me, I lowered the rifle. The barrel pointed down at the dirt floor. I couldn't do it. I would rather die than become the thing that destroys a family like this. The relief that washed over me was immediate, a clean, cool wave in a life of fire. But it only lasted for a second. A shadow fell over the doorway, and I heard a guttural roar of pure rage. Traitor. It was Idris. I turned, and the last thing I saw was his face, twisted into a mask of absolute hatred and fear. Then the world exploded in a symphony of noise and white-hot pain. The sound was deafening, a crackle of thunder right next to my ear. I felt the impacts, 1, 2, 3, like giant fists punching through my chest and stomach. It didn't hurt the way I expected. It was a searing electrical fire that burned away everything else. I was thrown backward, my rifle clattering to the floor. As I fell, time seemed to stretch and slow down like honey dripping in the cold. The sounds of the raid, the screams, Idris's cursing, it all faded into a distant, muffled hum. The only thing I could see clearly was the pastor's face, his eyes wide with shock, not for himself but for me. I hit the ground hard. I tried to take a breath, but my lungs filled with something warm and wet. Blood. I tasted copper and salt. My vision started to tunnel, the edges turning dark and fuzzy. My last thought wasn't of anger or revenge. It was a simple, quiet question that floated in the darkness closing in. Is this what faith feels like? Then the blackness swallowed everything. The pain vanished. The sounds stopped. There was only silence. I was gone. There was no tunnel, no choir of angels, just a release. It was like I had been holding my breath my entire life, and in that last moment, I finally let it all out. The fire in my chest was just gone. The screams from the village, Idris's curses, the frantic thumping of my own failing heart, it all just faded away. Like a radio being slowly turned down until all that was left was a soft, gentle hiss. I felt light, lighter than air. For a moment I was confused. I tried to feel my hands, my feet, the ground beneath me, but there was nothing to feel. It was like I was just a thought, a point of awareness floating in a vast, warm nothingness. The darkness that had swallowed me wasn't cold or scary. It was calm. A deep, velvety black that was more peaceful than any night sky I had ever seen. All the weight I had carried, the rifle, the guilt, the emptiness, it had all been left behind with that broken body on the floor of the hut. I remember thinking, so this is it. This is the end. I'd always been taught that for a man like me, a life of blood and violence, the end would be fire and torment. But there was no fire. There was no pain. There was only stillness. A silence so complete it felt like a presence. I was alone, but for the first time in my life I wasn't lonely. The roaring emptiness inside me had been filled with this profound quiet. And then something changed. It wasn't a sound and it wasn't a sight, not at first. It was a feeling. A low hum, like a single perfect note being played somewhere in the distance. A note that I felt in the very core of my new existence. I turned toward it, though I had no head to turn. I moved toward it, though I had no feet to walk. I was just drawn to it. And in the center of that perfect, peaceful black, a tiny spark appeared. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, but it shone with a light that felt more real than the sun. It wasn't a harsh light. It didn't burn. It called to me. It promised something I hadn't felt since I was a small boy, before they came, before the hate. It promised warmth. It promised home. As the light began to grow, slowly, steadily, I felt a flicker of something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. But I also felt a tremor of fear. I was a murderer. A monster. What right did I have to move toward a light like that? What judgment was waiting for me inside that beautiful, terrifying glow? The light pulled at me, a gentle tide in that endless, silent ocean of black. As I drifted closer, I felt that flicker of fear again. I was a killer. My soul was stained with so much blood and ash. A light this pure, it should have burned me to nothing. It should have rejected me. I braced myself, expecting to be cast out, to be judged for the monster I was. I deserved fire. I deserved an eternity of pain for what I had done. But the light, it didn't burn. It bathed me. It was a warmth that sank past skin and bone and settled deep into the hollow space where my soul used to be. The closer I got, the more the light took on a shape. It wasn't a sharp outline, but a soft, human form, robed in a white so brilliant it seemed to be woven from starlight itself. I couldn't see a face clearly, but I didn't need to. Every part of my new being, every fiber of my consciousness knew exactly who I was seeing. It was a knowing that was deeper than sight, more certain than any fact I had ever learned. It was Jesus. I fell to my knees, though I had no knees to bend. My entire existence just bowed. I was a terrorist, a murderer, a creature of hate, and I was in the presence of pure love. The contrast was so staggering, I felt myself begin to unravel. I waited for the verdict, for the condemnation, for the voice of God to list my sins and cast me into the hell I had earned. But the voice that came wasn't a roar of thunder. It wasn't a voice of judgment. It was a sound that was also a feeling, a calm that washed over me, quieting the last of my fear. It spoke not to my ears, but directly to my heart. Aleyu, my child, I see you. In those few words, my entire life unfolded before me. But I wasn't seeing it through my own eyes anymore. I was seeing it through his. I saw the little boy I used to be, laughing as he chased a goat in a village I could barely remember. I saw the terror on that boy's face the day the men came and stole him. I felt his pain as they beat the kindness out of him, as they filled him with a poison they called faith. He showed me the loneliness, the emptiness, the scared child who put on a mask of rage just to survive. He didn't show me these things to make excuses for me. He showed them to me so I would understand that even in my darkest moments, when I thought I was completely alone, he had been there. Seeing the lost little boy inside the monster, an ocean of love so powerful and so absolute crashed over me. It wasn't a gentle love. It was a force of nature, a cleansing flood that rushed into every dark corner of my soul and washed away years of filth and hatred. It didn't just forgive my sins, it annihilated them. It healed wounds I didn't even know I had. I began to weep. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure, overwhelming gratitude. All my life I had dealt in death, and here I was, being embraced by life itself. Then he showed me the hut again. He showed me the pastor's family in my own hand lowering the rifle. That mercy you showed them, the voice explained, the feeling of love growing even stronger. That wasn't yours alone. That was my love, flowing through you. A single drop of it was enough to break through a lifetime of hate. And for that reason, your story is not over. A hand, made of that same impossible light, touched my shoulder. The warmth intensified, filling me with a purpose so clear and bright it was almost blinding. Go back, he commanded, the voice now filled with a gentle but unbreakable authority. Tell them what you have seen. Show them that my light can reach into the deepest darkness. Show them that my love is greater than any hate. Go, be my witness. I didn't want to leave. This place, this presence, was the only true home I had ever known. But the command was not a suggestion. It was a new beginning. I felt a sudden, powerful pull, like a rope tied around my soul, yanking me back, away from the light, away from his peace. The perfect silence began to fade, replaced by a distant, muffled ringing. The darkness dissolved. The warmth receded. I was being vacuumed back into a world of pain and brokenness. But this time, I wouldn't be going back empty. I didn't want to go. The thought of leaving this place, this perfect, all-consuming love, was an agony worse than any bullet. To go back meant returning to the pain, to the world of dust and blood and hate I had just escaped. Every part of me screamed to stay here, to dissolve into this light forever. I wanted to beg him, to plead to be allowed to remain in this peace. But I looked into that presence and I understood. This love wasn't something to be hoarded, it was something to be given away. The command, go back, wasn't a punishment. It was a promotion. He wasn't sending me away from his presence. He was sending me with it. In that silent understanding I gave my answer. A feeling of acceptance, a surrendering of my will to his. As soon as I agreed, the light seemed to pulse with a new intensity, and the voice spoke one last time, embedding the words into the fabric of my new soul. Do not be afraid of their faces. The boy they tried to kill is gone. The man who returns belongs to me. My spirit will be your words, and my love will be your shield. It wasn't just a promise, it was a recreation. I felt it happen. The old foundation of fear and emptiness was being ripped out, and a new one, built on a rock of unshakable love, was being laid in its place. He was giving me my armor for the battle to come. Then came the pull. It was sudden and violent, a physical jolt to my spiritual form. It felt like an invisible rope had been tied around my chest and was yanking me backward, dragging me out of heaven. The light, my beautiful, warm light, began to shrink, becoming a distant star in a sea of encroaching darkness. The perfect silence shattered, replaced by a low, muffled hum that grew louder and louder, like the sound of rushing water in my ears. The peace was ripped away, and the cold began to seep back in, a familiar chill that spoke of the world I had left behind. I was falling, tumbling back through the veil, away from home. The final moment was an impact. Not a crash, but a violent, soul-shaking slam. 1 second I was a spirit in the void. The next I was trapped in meat and bone again. The first thing I felt was pain. A searing, white-hot fire in my chest and my stomach, 1,000 times worse than before. The second was the grit of dirt in my mouth and the coppery taste of my own blood. My lungs screamed for air, and I took a breath that was more of a ragged, wet gasp. It was agony. A single desperate tear rolled down my face, not from the pain in my body, but from the memory of the peace I had lost. My eyes fluttered open. The world was a blurry mess of orange and brown. The sun was rising, and leaning over me, their faces a mixture of terror and absolute awe, was the family I had been sent to kill. What would you do if you were given a second chance at a life you never thought you deserved? If my story has moved you, please subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. The story of how I faced my old commander again, armed with nothing but this newfound faith, is something you won't want to miss. The first breath I took was like swallowing broken glass. It was a ragged, wet gasp that sent a universe of pain exploding through my chest. The gentle blackness was gone, replaced by a blinding, dusty sunlight filtering through the thatch roof. I was back, and my body was a prison of agony. Every nerve ending was screaming, a symphony of fire where the bullets had torn through me. I tried to move, but my limbs felt like they were filled with lead and hot coals. The pastor's face swam into view above me. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with an awe so profound it looked like he was staring at the sun. His wife was beside him, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The 2 small children peeked from behind her legs, their initial terror replaced by a wide-eyed, silent wonder. I was the monster who had kicked down their door. I was the man who had been sent to kill them. But they weren't looking at me like that. They were looking at me like I was a ghost who had just learned how to breathe again. The next few days were a blur of pain and confusion. The pastor, whose name I learned was John, cleaned my wounds with a gentleness I had never known. His hands, which I expected to be shaking with anger or fear, were steady. He never once flinched. His wife, Mary, would bring me sips of water and thin broth. She never met my eyes at first, but there was no hatred in her silence. There was just shock. I was a living, breathing contradiction, a testament to something they couldn't explain, and I was lying on a mat in the corner of their home. The home I had invaded. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than the pain from my wounds. A week later, a man from a mission clinic 2 villages over came to see me. He was an older man with kind eyes and tired hands. He unwrapped the bandages John had applied, and he just stared. He took out a stethoscope, listened to my chest, my breathing. He looked at the entry and exit wounds. He kept shaking his head, muttering under his breath. "It's not possible," he finally said, looking at Pastor John, "not at me. The trajectory, one of these should have torn his heart to pieces, the other should have shredded his lung. He should have bled out in 60 seconds. He looked back at me, his clinical gaze softening into pure astonishment. "Son," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "whoever you are, God is not finished with you yet." That was the first time I didn't feel like a monster. I felt like a message. But the real battle wasn't in my healing flesh. It was in my mind. The old Allah was still there, a ghost in the machine. A sudden noise would make my muscles tense, my hand instinctively reaching for a rifle that was no longer there. I'd see Pastor John pick up a cutting knife for a yam, and for a split second my body would scream threat. Years of training, of paranoia, of seeing everyone as either a target or a traitor, it was all wired into my very bones. But then this new feeling, this quiet warmth that now lived where the emptiness used to be, would rise up and whisper, "Peace, you are safe." I spent hours in silence, unable to speak. How do you find the words to thank a man for saving your life after you tried to take his? How do you look a woman in the eye when you almost made her a widow and her children orphans? One afternoon, Pastor John sat beside me. He didn't say anything. He just started reading from a small, worn Bible. His voice was calm, and the words were water on a scorched and barren land. They were the words of the one I had met. They were promises of mercy for the broken, of love for the unlovable. They were my story. Finally, with a voice hoarse from disuse and thick with shame, I spoke my first words to him. "Why?" I croaked, the single word tearing at my throat. "Why are you helping me?" He closed his Bible and looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the same peace in his eyes that I had seen in the eyes of Jesus. "Because Aliyu," he said softly, using my name for the first time, "the man who came to kill my family died on this floor. The man who woke up is the one God sent back. In that moment, the last wall of hate in my heart crumbled to dust. What would you do if you had to learn how to live again from the very beginning? If this story is speaking to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. You need to hear what happened when word got back to my old commander that his dead soldier was not only alive, but living with the very people he was supposed to kill. Learning to live again was like learning to walk. At first, every step was a conscious, clumsy effort. My body remembered how to fight, how to kill. My muscles would tense at the sound of a twig snapping. My eyes would scan every new face for threats. The old Aleyu, the soldier, was a ghost that still lived in my bones, and he fought hard against the new spirit growing inside me. I remember Pastor John handed me a hoe to help in his small garden. The weight of the wooden handle felt so much like a rifle stock that for a second, my heart hammered in my chest. But then his little boy Samuel laughed, chasing a butterfly nearby, and the sound of that pure, innocent joy was like a cool hand on my fevered soul. The ghost in my bones grew a little quieter. My relationship with the family was a slow, delicate dance. At first I was a project, a miracle they cared for. But as I healed, I became something else. I started helping Mary carry water from the well. I would carve small wooden toys for the children, my hands, which had only ever known how to operate weapons, now fumbling to create something that brought a smile. We started eating our meals together, not as a pastor and the exterist he saved, but just as people. One evening, Mary placed a bowl of stew in front of me and she smiled. A real, genuine smile with no fear in it. I had to look down at my food because my eyes filled with tears. This simple act of acceptance from the woman I was supposed to make a widow, it was a grace so profound it physically hurt. The world itself looked different. Before, I only saw the world in shades of threat and opportunity, a landscape of targets and hiding places. Now I saw color. I saw the impossible orange of the sunset over the savannah. I saw the deep green of the cassava leaves in John's garden. I saw the light in people's eyes. One spent my whole life being told these people, these Christians, were an infestation. But living among them, I saw only kindness, resilience, and a faith so deep it was the very bedrock of their lives. The hate Idris had poured into me was a poison designed to blind me. But the love I had been shown was the antidote, and it was allowing me to truly see for the first time. The mission Jesus had given me, be my witness, echoed in my heart every single day. For a while I thought it just meant staying alive, being a living miracle, but that wasn't it. One night as Pastor John prayed for the families in other villages still living in fear, I understood. My testimony wasn't meant to be kept safe within the walls of this one small hut. A light isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to shine in the darkness. My purpose wasn't just to be saved from my old life. It was to be sent back into it, armed not with a rifle, but with a story. A story of a love so powerful it could walk into the heart of a killer and bring him back to life. I had to go back. I had to find the others. The boys I called brother. The ones still lost in that same empty darkness I had known. Telling John was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. He and his family had become my world, my sanctuary. To leave them felt like tearing a part of myself away. I found him one evening as he was mending a fishing net. I told him everything, that my story wasn't finished, that I had to go, that there were other lost boys who needed to hear that there was a way out. He listened silently, his hands never stopping their work. When I finished, my voice cracking, he looked up at me. There was sadness in his eyes, but also a fierce pride. "We always knew you were not meant only for us, Aloyu," he said, his voice steady. "You are a letter from God sent to a world that has forgotten how to read. Go. Deliver your message. What would you do if your new purpose meant leaving the only safety you'd ever known to walk back into the heart of the storm?" If you want to know what happened when I went searching for my old brothers in arms, subscribe and hit that notification bell. The first person I found was someone I never, ever expected to see again. Leaving that village, leaving Pastor John and his family, was the second hardest thing I ever had to do. The first was learning to forgive the man I used to be. Every day I have to look in the mirror and see the face of a killer. But now I also see the face of a man who was shown a mercy he never earned. I see a man who was given a second chance when he deserved nothing but a final end. My story isn't really about Boko Haram. It's not about guns or politics or war. It's about the emptiness that lives inside a person when they don't know love. It's about how that emptiness can be filled with hate so completely that you become a monster. But it's also about a love so powerful, so absolute, that it can walk straight into the heart of that monster. Look him in the eye and call him my child. I'm not here to prove anything to you. I'm just here to be a witness. To tell you that the same Jesus who met me when I was bleeding out on a dirt floor is real. He sees the parts of you that you hide from everyone else. He knows the weight you carry, the mistakes you can't forgive yourself for. He's not waiting to judge you. He's waiting to heal you. I'm living proof that no one is too far gone. No darkness is too deep for his light to penetrate. My life was a message of hate, written in blood and fire. But God took that broken, ugly message, and he rewrote it into a story of his grace. He can do the same for you. So I have to ask you, what do you do when you realize the love you were looking for has been looking for you all along? If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. The journey I took back into the lion's den and the stories of the other lost boys I found there is a testimony to God's power that you will not want to miss.